So starting off with the Alicat models conversion here for the BF109D, using the Eduard kit in 1/32 scale. I followed the first few steps and they're relatively straightforward. Like I showed in the review, we've got a written part and then picture diagrams as well to go along with it. So just following through those, the first three are relatively straightforward. We're using an E1 kit, so 2 is irrelevant. So 1 is just marking out here for the new radiators, and you've got a recessed part around here on the Eduard kit. So I've just drawn around with a Sharpie marker, copying what's been done in the instructions, to leave a 1mm gap, and then that will mean that I can just cut along there, take this whole section out, and then these 2 new radiators just drop in. That's the hope anyway, they just drop in nicely like that. And the 1mm gap is used by this ledge here to help with the ease of fitting. And it's a flush join on the front, so you don't need the 1mm gap running across the front there. So that's the first bit, and also we've got this part here to take out, which is to take the new part of the radiator. When the nose comes on, the underneath of that, there's a radiator that just goes underneath the wing there, just to help that. So that's relatively straightforward. So the whole point now is to try and get that cut out nicely. This part here does run around a natural panel line, so you can just follow the panel line there and that will be no problem. So I'll get these parts cut out and then we're checking at the next bit. So I've just got these parts here out from the oil cooler, and I just thought I'd show you how I went about it. I scored it with a sharp knife running down there, and then this is actually quite thin plastic on both sides here. It's a lot thinner than the actual thickness of the wing, and then going through this bit is a little bit thicker, so I've just kind of scored through there with the knife like this, and then I have just started to bend it now, just to get a natural kind of crease in it, and then that shows up the line on the back here, so then you can run along that white line there, and that will help us get a nice sort of clean break, and then we can it can be cleaned up afterwards. So I'll just run along again like that. There we go, that's that bit out. Now this side is done, so I've cleaned that up, and that slots in quite nicely there now, as you can see. What I didn't realise until I started looking through this is obviously this is meant to just be a complete wing. I was thinking this was a different type of radiator, but it's not. It's meant to be completely sealed in there. So you've got to make sure there's a panel line here that runs down like that, and that wants to line up nicely with this one here, which it does there. I've just sort of kept sanding and taking bits off until it does. And also these rivets are meant to line up running that way. So that's pretty good. What I'm then going to do is you obviously use super glue. I'll do it from the back like this, putting super glue in and around just to make sure it's a nice firm join. I'll just put a small bit there to tack it, and then try filling the back of it with super glue, and then just use a little bit of Mr. Surfacer just to run that in, and then we can get that nice and flush then. And then the same's needed for that side. I've also taken this bit out here. I haven't taken the radiator off of its plug there, but I'm starting to think that's a little bit too small. As you can see, I think that's meant to be flush, so we'll check that as we go on through the build. I've cut it to what it says in the instructions, so once this is together with the nose and we bring it and join it in, that's when I might actually move these parts. So I'll go ahead and get these together now and get some filler in there, and then we'll have a look at the next step. So I've got these parts in here now, and given them a slight sand back just to soften the edges and try and begin blending them in. And I've now run some beads of Mr. Surfacer 500 around the edges, just gently, so I didn't want to cover it too much, because I want to keep as much of this surface detail as possible, and the less I have to put back in the better. I'm probably going to have to put a few more of these rivets in, but that's no problem. I've got all the riveters here to put those back in, and obviously the panel lines. I'm just trying to concentrate on getting everything smoothed in, so just checking. It's still a little bit wet, so I'm going to probably leave that overnight, because it's much better when it goes very hard to be able to sand it back. Now, something to note, which isn't properly explained in the instructions, I think, and it's slightly misleading as well, as these parts have a notch in them. There's a circle here, access hatch, like up here, and that is not meant to be there for this model, this version. So I've put the filler over there. It's actually just a little bit further back. We do have extremely good diagrams for putting these in. So you've got these here showing you where the parts go, and then you've got a nice measured point here with with measurements here off of the trailing edge of the wing to show you where to put these back in. So here you can see the access hatches like that. Now it does say about adding these in, but I believe they're already there. I can't see there's much wrong with that, to be honest. So they're fine. So it's just these circles. It's just 1, 2, 3. So they're going to be something like, I don't think it's to scale. No, it's just under. So it's not far off. So you've got one coming down here. Then we've got one up there and one down here. So we've got the one that was on the kit part there. It's just a bit further over. So not quite sure how I'm going to put those in yet. I do have some scribing template here with some circles, so I might just probably use those. So that's how we are there at the minute. So in the next update, I will have got this sanded in and blended in, and probably actually given this a coat of just a bit of Tamiya neutral grey, just to make sure everything's gone in nicely, and then rescribe those parts, and then it's just a case of putting in the kit parts here for the wheel wells and putting the top of the wings on and getting ready to fit it to the fuselage. So next up is preparing the fuselage halves for the engine cowling, which is going to go on, the replacement one. Now what needs to be done here is, it's not that involved, but it's very easy to miss this. So not only do you need to literally cut this off there, so a straight line running right down here, you also need to cut this forward part here that goes on the top along the natural panel line, so that's simple enough. But along here there's a raised stiffener rib. It says about this in the instructions, but it took me I had to read it a few times to get my head around it. So that needs to be removed completely. That's on both sides. However, there needs to be a panel line once that's gone, showing where the wing joins the fuselage. So the earlier 109s didn't have that stiffener, and then it was a panel line. So they advise using this as a guide and running a panel line along there, then removing the raised detail, then you'll be left with the panel line that you want. So that's just something to bear in mind if you're going to be tackling one of these yourself. Here should be straightforward, just be careful, I would say be a bit more to the front of it and then sand it back, as opposed to try and cut it flush, because if you lose that, it's gonna be quite difficult to get that to join up. It's going to be replicated with this here. So I'll go ahead and cut this off, and hopefully it'll all still be how it needs to, it'll all still be okay and ready to move forward. It's just moving on with parts for the fuselage here, and there's quite a lot of resin cutting, so it's worth noting I use one of these. I think it's very important with the particulate filter, as well as the actual other filter, which I don't quite know the name of. So it's good for paint and this, because it catches all of the particles. So I've had that on whilst I've been sawing all of these big bits of resin up, and just in the process of cleaning up the radiator here, so I've done that, cut the plug off the back here flush. This part needs to be left. That nib there gives you the right sit here. It's what's the word I'm looking for? It gives the back end, makes it sit up how you need it to be, so it keeps it in line like that. So that's quite useful. I have opened these parts up a little bit more here, and that now fits in nicely, and it will go like this. So there's a little gap there, but I think once the wing's together, it's hard to tell at the minute because it moves so much. Once I've got the top parts to this wing together, then we'll see what we can do about that gap. I can probably get rid of it there, to be honest. So that'll go on there, and it sits up quite nice again with the tab at the back. And again, I've cleaned up the end here of the cowling. That just needs sanding flush, which I'll do once I've got the fuselage together, and it sits nicely now together. And that's just going to be a butt join there onto the parts of the fuselage like this. That's going to be a butt join on there. Now I have left a little nib there so that I can sand this back. There is a recess part here as well, and that is your line for this. So that doesn't go inside. You need to cut that off, and then this joins on straight to that. So there's just a bit there which takes the kit part, and that needs to come off. Also sawn this bit off as well, so that is the cover at the top here for the machine guns. So it's all coming together quite nicely. I've also scribed in the panel line here and taken off the raised detail. I have overshot it in places, but that's fine. We've got to fill this filler cap here, and then scribe in another circular hatch there. And there's another circular hatch to go inside where these rivets go up into like a triangle there. So we're going to put a circle in the middle of that. So I think next is to get the cockpit sorted, finish off everything, and I think next is to get the cockpit sorted, get the two fuselage halves together, get the front end sorted, then start measuring up for the butt join, and then get the whole thing together with the wings, the fuselage, and the cowling all coming together, and then we'll be somewhere near it. So we'll have a look at how the cockpit goes together. I need to do a bit of research on what the interior parts of the D were. We do have, the only bit we've got for the interior in here is a spade grip. So I've just got to check that it did have the spade grip. And I've also got a small photo etch fret. I've also got a small photo etch fret there from Eduard with some seat belts and a few instrument panels for the E1. So I've been progressing quite nicely with this one now. I've put a bit of filler in around the fuel cap here, and I've also, because we've got to get rid of that, and I've also sanded back the brace there and put the panel line in on both sides. And I'm now just getting to the point with this slot where I put in some of these round panels here, these circular panels. So we've got one going just ahead of the fuel cap there, filler cap, and then another one just here. I've also been test fitting with the radiator as well, and we've got the grille going in there, and that's quite nice. It does change how the ends here of the scoop, they sort of stick out a little bit, so I just need to touch those in as I glue it together. And there's not much leeway in it, so got to be a bit careful. Got to make sure that back piece is lined up, and of course we can sand it in. There's still quite a lot of the block showing there, and it's certainly not straight, and I think it's meant to be completely straight underneath, so just have to make sure that all lines up when it comes to joining on like this. but I can sort of make that all fit when it comes together. We've got to do the cockpit and everything else before that. So I've been doing a bit of looking at some reference as far as the cockpit is concerned, and it's hard to tell. I think it does look like the D did have a spade grip, so I'm probably going to put that on. I'm going to probably be doing one of the early Ds anyway, so I can kind of get away with it in thinking that some of the early ones had the spade grip if the late ones didn't. And also the layout seems to be, there's two kind of minds to it, whether it's just like the E's or it's like the A's. And the A cockpit's a little bit basic, so I'm not sure. I'm going to do a little bit more research, and then I'll land on something that I'm happy with, and then we'll just go with that. I'll probably do similar to an E, I think, because they'd started to do most of the changes, and everything's the same as an E1 more or less as far as the airframe's concerned. So I expect all they did was put a different engine on, and then there was a few different dials for the new engine. And I've started sanding this bit in here, and that's very smooth. I'm quite confident that that's going to be very nice when I put a bit of paint on there. That's coming pretty well. So I just need to finish off sanding around there and around here. Then I might see if I can, I don't know if these rivets are filled with the plastic dust, if it'll just blow out with an airbrush, so I'll check that as well. And then we'll be progressing quite nicely with the build then. It's actually quite simple getting the main parts of the conversion in. I'm sure things could be a lot worse with other aircraft conversions. This seems quite simple, as long as we can get the nose to join on nicely, which it does look like it will. The rest of it is more or less just resin parts to be added to the kit parts, or just like for like. So yeah, I'm quite impressed with it so far, so I'll continue with this. So working on the wing here, I decided to get it together, I think, get the top parts of the wing on, because I've had a go at sanding this in, and I've found that due to the fact that it's obviously one piece and it flexes quite a lot as you're sanding, there's a lot of movement there, and as it's super glue and it's quite a brittle joint, I've had some cracking around where the joint is. So what I think I'm going to do before I sand that flush is to get the two parts of the wing together. That will then get that block of resin there glued on solid, and that should then give me a nice platform to be able to sand that back. And I have checked, obviously, before you glue this you want to make sure, and I can get in here with the same access as I would be able to before. I can't get underneath to add more super glue, but the idea is that it shouldn't flex. It will flex a little bit on the middle there, but hopefully I can get around that. So that's the next step. And I just wanted to show you as well the way the wheel bay is made up, and it's very, very nicely done here by Eduard. You've got detail there on the upper half of the wing. Then we put this part of the wheel bay here, which is a raised part, which glues on very nicely and goes together. It's got two little notches which lock into these ribs here, so you can't go wrong with it. And then this part goes into the bottom piece, and as you bring the two together, it slots into a semicircle hole there, and also in between this part here, which is where the undercarriage leg's going to go, and it does fit very nicely there. And it slots in here with a nice fit into the wheel well housing there. And then when you actually get it lined up, you do have to be quite careful in getting it all lined up, because it is quite difficult. You know, it does like to move. There's not a lot of fixing points, and you want to check using this as a guide and then these two parts here as a guide that you're all lined up nicely. I would, if you've got a little bit of misalignment, it is possible to get it all joined up, but the machine gun hole then does go a little bit out of alignment. I would think it would probably be better to get these parts here where the flaps are going lined up, as opposed to that hole, because you could always drill it out quite nice, drill it out a bit easier. But you should be able to, with a bit of pulling and a bit of holding and taping, you should be able to get this lined up and the hole lined up there. So just, you know, persevere with that. And then at the back here you can see where the resin block is, which is that's going to need super glue. So I'm going to fix all this in with Tamiya Extra Thin, and then run a bit of super glue along there and clamp that down to make sure we get a nice strong join. We will then have we've got a resin aileron which is going to go on here. It goes on that side, and that will come in there like that. And then you've got the flaps up here, which are going to be the kit part. So that's like for like. We do have the extended flaps here, but I think that's for the B version. It's quite confusing looking through the instructions for this one, and I think the long and short of it is it does say in black and white that it doesn't include parts for a B aircraft, but as far as I can tell it does. It includes all the parts you need for a B aircraft, including this and the extra piece there that you would cut out and put an extra slat in there. So if you did want to do a B version, it seems as though you've got all of that in here. You also wouldn't put the exhaust stubs in, and that's the main differences. No exhaust stubs, longer slats, and a few other small minor differences. All of which are perfectly easy and possible to do. You'd have to get rid of this, so you'd fill the wing gun here, and you'd fill this hatch here, along with that tab sticking out. That would all be gone, and then you would have pretty much a 132nd B aircraft as well. So that's very useful to have. So I'm going to get all this glued together now, and then we'll check back in and see how that's looking. Hopefully this will be sanded back nice and smooth, and then we can go on and progress with the fuselage. So I've just been working on the cockpit here, and the only reference I can find for a D model 109 is through model kits, and the best one I found a picture of the classic airframes resin cockpit that came in their kit, and looking at that, I mean, they're usually extremely accurate, and the reviewer, I think it's on Modelling Madness, says that it's pretty accurate as well. So I guess I can't find any reference, so I'm struggling. So, and it looks pretty much like the layout of this E cockpit is here. So everything's looking as it should, and the only question left is whether we use the spade grip for the control lever, which we've got here. Nicely, you've got two of these, so if you ever wanted to do like a Swiss one or anything like that, you've got another 30-second spade grip there, providing I don't break one taking it off. Now, I'm not sure whether these Ds had it. As far as I know, the best I've come up with is that the early versions, the A and the B, all had a spade grip, and then the C and the D onwards had the normal control lever, which would be the kit part, which is here. So I'm not sure yet. I'm going to go on a bit further, see if I can get some definitive information on that. But apart from that, it's business as usual in the cockpit area here. So I'm just building this as per the kit instructions. The only part that comes with the Alicat set is the spade grip. I do have the Eduard zoom set here, just to give an instrument panel, some rudder pedals and seat belts. In this scale, usually these seat belts are a bit sort of touch and go, because they do start to look a little bit printed, so I might weather those up a little bit, and maybe even repaint them myself. The HGW fabric seat belts are best in 1/32, but we'll see how we go. Put the sidewalls on both of these and all of the small components, so I've added all of that, and then we've got the cockpit tub here. I did fix the seat on. I wasn't going to, but I figured that you can't, I'm going to be able to spray in and around the back of there, so that's no problem. I've added on the rudder pedals here, so they're quite nice. I cut down the oxygen, I think it's the oxygen filter or oxygen tank, something like that here, because it's too tall, so I've cut it down so that there's 3 holes below where that gap is there. So it's 3 holes down to the ground, and I'm going to put a chain around here and back into that hole there. I've probably got some photo etch chain or a bit of wire or something, you know, that's pretty straightforward. And then a small part here goes on the hole for the seat belts here on the back of the seat. So hopefully once all that's painted, we'll get it together, do some detail work, get the fuselage halves together. I have done some test fitting, and I've got this front part here sanded back now, so that goes in to give you the height and the strength at the front, so that goes in like that. Then we've got the top of the gun bay here, which just slots into it there on the side of the, in between the two. It's all going to fall apart, but it basically goes like that. And then we've got the cover there as well, which goes over the top. So that should make the front end very, very strong and give it a nice solid feel. Then we're going to add it to the wing root here, and then start getting this part tied in to the fuselage halves. So I've gone ahead and got the cockpit together now, and I've just left it like this so that you can see the detail I've gone to. I should have probably taken a few more shots before I glued it together, but as is always the case, I got carried away a little bit. So if we zoom this in, hopefully here you can see all I've added to this cockpit is, as far as aftermarket's concerned, is the Eduard zoom set. And then in there, I'm not sure if you can see too well, I've added a bit of wiring down the sides there, just using photos and a bit of reference that I could find on the internet. Generally aftermarket sets as well. Obviously the main part of the Eduard set that's key is the harnesses there, which really bring that seat to life. Got the rudder pedals there as well, and a nice coloured coloured instrument panel there. That's the lower part. We've also got the upper part here, and I've put some PVA glue there in the lenses to give it a kind of lensing effect, so that's quite nice. And yeah, it's a basic cockpit, the old early 109s. Basically I've pretty much followed the E cockpit. I have not put the spade grip on there because I'm not sure the D's had it. Certainly I'm going to model this one as though it hasn't got it. I've put a little bit of paper there in the just transfer decal paper, the cover for decals, in the map case there, just to make it look like it's a map. Yeah, I'm pretty pleased with it. So the next step in this process is to add a few more parts here. So we've got the top of the gun deck here, and also part of where the instrument panel goes. That slots into here. There's some grooves on the inside. Can't quite do that. There you go. It just slides in like that, and that creates a top deck. Now these parts are very important now for getting our shape correct for when we bring the new nose in. So this piece here as well glues in quite nicely, and it goes into a slot there. And then that is going to give us the depth there, which is why Alicat is used this point to glue it on. This piece here gives you the depth when you come to make it up to the wing here, and it sits in solid like that. There is going to be a little bit of wing root issues here and there that I just need to work around, but I'm sure it will all come together. And then hopefully once I've cleaned up the end of this, that will join on there as well, and we should start to have a pretty good join with a completely new nose on this kit. So I'm going to start working on this now, and I think I'm probably going to get it all glued together, make sure that the join's all nice and it's fit well, and then talk you through that once it's all together so I can show you, because there's going to be a little bit of work under here to try and get the rear piece of this fit in there. That's an actual kit part, which is a known slight problem with this, just getting that to come in nicely there. And then on the sides here you can probably see there, because I haven't glued it to this resin part, there's a sort of bit of movement there, so I've left that intentionally, so I've got a bit of play. So that's the next step, and we'll check in hopefully when this is all gone together. Okay, right, so we're checking back in with this one. For you guys watching this, this will have seemed like a 5-second job when I was last talking about this, but for me, the last time I did an update on camera to this was in March, and it is now nearing the end of September, so this has taken quite an amount of time. And the main difficulty I was finding is working in this scale mainly. When I sort of started this build, hadn't actually got anything in 1/32 under my belt, and I started a few things, and I'm just sort of learning my way. So it's been a bit of a learning curve, and obviously this is a resin conversion, so couldn't really have been much more difficult. You know, I'm trying to bash two parts together that aren't meant to fit, and you know, they are engineered quite well by Alley Cat Models, but again, there's still a bit of work needing to be done. So obviously I haven't been working on it for 6 months, but on and off I've been doing bits and pieces here. Now today I've had probably the main breakthrough. So I've been working on sanding in and smoothing out the join of this nose on and off over over a long period, and well, I think I'm finally there. So I've used Tamiya Grey XF19 just to check the seams. Here, I don't know how well this is going to show up, but it's quite prominent. All of the rivet details been put back in here because obviously sanding the wing join lost it all completely out to the circles here for the wheel wells, and same on this side. You might be able to see just how bare it is underneath, and you'll get an idea of how much detail is lost when trying to work with these things. It doesn't have to be like this. Like I said, I've made it more difficult. If you were a bit of a master of these things, I'm sure you could have put these two bits here that are the blanks and all the rest of it, and just worked in that area without causing too much damage to the rest of it. But I quite early on took the decision to go all the way through the detail and put it back in, just to make sure we're starting with something smooth. And I have now done that on the upper surface, and I'm quite happy with this. I've been putting off this job for a while, and this took literally an hour, and all the detail is in, including the new seam line there for the fuselage join, because the way the Messerschmitt was built, these panels here, hence why there's panel lines all the way through, they're all separate panels, and they were in halves as well, so there's a spar going along there, and then these panels are riveted to it on each side like that, and then they come in from that side as well. So there is actually a line there, but it's always best when, certainly working in this scale, but it's always best with any 109 to completely get rid of that seam, because the fuselage joins together obviously, and then put a new panel line in instead of trying to use the seam, because it never looks right. So as you can see under here where I haven't done it, that's been completely smoothed out. There's no problem there at all, there's no hint of the line showing, so now I can just rescribe a line in there, hopefully get it right first time, and then put back in all of the detail. So the reason I'm showing you this now is because I've done the top, and I wanted to show you how I was going about doing it, and showing you what I've got to do at the bottom. So here it's all bare, as I say, and then basically we need to put in quite a few panel lines. We've got to put some back in, but mainly it's rivet detail. So we've got a panel line going across there and down here, and we're rejoining these fuselage lines. But all through here is panel lining, is riveting that needs to go back in. Now, something that's turned out, which I didn't have when I started this build, and I'm incredibly thankful for having it now, is you will have seen on the channel my review for the Valiant Wings book on the Messerschmitt 109. And in the back of that are these plans. And these are absolutely invaluable for this build. I would say, you know, it wouldn't probably... this book is a absolute must if you're going to do this Alley Cat conversion. And the main reason for it is it shows you all of the riveting marks and where all of the panel lines and the detail goes. So for putting it back in, I mean, it's invaluable. These are in 1/48 scale. Obviously that's no problem. You can just kind of use points on the aircraft, as you can see, to put them back in. And if you're working in 148, you can use these plans to check how you're doing. So I've used that to put in the detail on the side here, using this profile down here, there, and that's been very good for that. And yes, like I said, extremely useful. So how I go about doing this is I kind of pick a point on the aircraft. So I pick a point on the aircraft which is prominent. So here we're starting from, this is where we haven't lost the details. So on the plans, that is this part here. So we've got that panel line and that corresponds here, and all the detail is present up through there. So looking at that, there's another panel line that needs to go in here. So we've got a remnant, a slight remnant of it there, and that needs to then carry on back through here. So how I do that is just generally, I mean, you could be a lot more precise and use a ruler, but I tend to just mark it off with pencil in the rough area for starters, and I try and line that up so we're going right past the wheel well, so I can still see a hint of it there where it hasn't been sanded back, and I just kind of almost tracing it here, almost sketching it here, sorry, and I just kind of sketch a line back in there. There you can see where it is, and that just gives me a guide. So I start on that, and that's the only main panel line that needs to go in here. Then along this area we do have quite considerable panel lines to put in here now, and some rivet detail, and we just kind of work that up. So then we're joining up, so we're here to there, so we're getting that line in. Then there is actually a line and a hint there and across here, so that horizontal line pretty much just catches this here, so something like that. Yeah, doesn't line up with this one on the fuselage, which is going to come around here. So just to show you, you can see that one there is this one here. Again, I'm hoping this is showing that, but bear with me if it isn't. The light's a bit of a pain, but there's a line here, then a gap. So I'm using that gap to work out the distance, just roughly by eye. I mean, you know, we're not going to worry too much about this. So we got that gap there. There's no horizontal line. So then we're just sketching in, looks like halfway up the aileron, so somewhere there. And generally when you're doing this, with most kits, they kind of work on the part placement being through an actual join, which this all was. These are all lines I was trying to eliminate, so that then I can put them back in cleanly. And again, that doesn't look quite right. Now, if you're building for a competition, or you know, specific, or you want to be very detailed, then you can obviously measure this and work it out and get it absolutely spot on. But all I like to do is just kind of do it by eye so it looks right. Now that's obviously quite a thick line there, but I'll know when I come to it that I want to be this side of it, so it doesn't really matter how thick it is. So that is pretty much us sorted for that one side. Now you can do it two ways. On the top, I actually put the whole lot in. So I put the panel lines in and also sketched out the rivet lines as well. Then I did the rivet lines first because I just wanted to get a feel for how that would go, and it went very well. And then I put the panel lines in afterwards, and then any of the rivets that were near the panel lines I put in at the end. So if you were going to do this, again with this Eduard kit, I must admit I'm only putting these rivets in because they're in the base kit of the Eduard kit. I probably wouldn't bother to add this just to a kit that doesn't have them, but it obviously stands out if you already start out with them. So I do now need to put them back in. So we've got a few lines that go through here. And obviously I'm doing this on camera, so I'm at a bit of a strange angle. Usually my lines are a bit straighter when I'm doing this. I'm just trying to demonstrate. And again, the benefit I've got here is I'm using the faint lines left over from where I actually can see it on the kit parts. So it's not actually as difficult as it would be if I was trying to put these in just a bare plastic, because there are faint lines left. And that again comes into play when you start using your riveter. You can follow those, and that sort of lines you up. And again, you only need, see, if you're putting in this whole line, you know, as long as you've got a couple of rivets showing here and a couple of rivets showing there, and you've got the line as a guide, then as you run along with the wheel, you can kind of straighten up and see where you are. So the tool that I use is this one, which is one of the Rosie Riveter tools, and I'm using it in the 1mm size. And this is a riveting wheel there, which is just a wheel with spikes on it, on a nice handy tool with a nice wooden handle. And all it is a case of running the wheel along the line that you want to do. So I just need to try and get in a bit closer here so I can kind of pick it up. Like I say, I'm very far away from this. Usually I sort of hang over it and have, you know, my head would be sort of here, and I'd stay detailed. And I do find that going closing one eye seems to help me. So I tell you what, we won't do those double ones. I'll put this line back in here because I can see it a bit better. So it's just that one. So we do that one and this horizontal one as well, which... So concentrating on this line here, the tool has sort of two profiles. So if you can see there that the wheel is connected to the outside of one side of this bar. So that meaning you can either run your wheel down using this line here as your guide, or you can do it if you're in a tricky spot, you know, your line, you can have it over. So if you want to go up to something quite tight, then you can swap it around, and it's obviously either close up to the edge or far away from the edge. Now I am using it so I'm on the line, so I'm using the flush side here, we use for want of a better word, to line it up. So I just kind of start here somewhere, and then with quite good pressure. I find that you need to have a sort of medium pressure, otherwise you don't get very good results. It's a bit soft, and you just kind of run along, and I'm looking at my end point, not where I'm going, so I'm trying to line up just there. Now we'll come back to that in a minute because you're not going to see it very well. And then just to do this horizontal one, same thing. So I'm looking at where I'm ending, and I'm just going to roll it along with a constant pressure. Then after that, we rub off the pencil marks. So I'll just do that. So hopefully here you can see the Eduard moulded on ones. And then we've continued that line through here and put in one horizontal one there as well. It is struggling like mad, this camera, to actually see that, but hopefully you get the idea. Now looking on the top where I've put them in, which should show up a bit better because there's more. Like I said, all of this was put in using that method. This whole panel was completely bare. There were some here and they sort of faded out that way. I even had to put touch up a couple of these on that circle there, and that's how it all goes back in. And it's very effective for adding detail. As you can see, matches up quite nicely. Looking around the nose cowling here, you can see where I've put in some panel lines. That's where the pencil mark hasn't quite come out. That's not as thick as the panel line. And that's all gone pretty well. I've just sort of put in a few techniques that I've learned over the last few months in trying to do this on smaller scales, and that was all absolutely vital for getting this right. You just got to take your time, and if you get everything correct, then the job's easy. And I've been using this blue 3M tape, which has worked very good as a guide tape. It's nice and sticky, you can re-stick it a few times. And I thought down along here as well, this panel line and the rivets alongside it, I thought that was very effective. Had to check the straightness of that and keep adjusting it, and then we've had those lines go over the cross of it as well. And as you can see, it's all very, very effective getting all this detail in. So I'm going to continue now and add the rest of the detail in under here, and it's this whole area here that's going to have details. Some of this has got super glue in it, so I may actually, we'll see how the scribing goes, but I might just leave some of these panels if I start picking out bits of the super glue. Get this piece in here, and then we can move on to the next stage, which is adding on some of these extra parts of resin in here. And obviously these being the delicate bits, you don't want to add any of these on until you're completely satisfied with the way the airframe is taking shape. And if you've got to do tons of sanding, you don't want to have loads of bits of resin on there. So we'll check back in with the next update when the airframe will be complete and we'll be working with some of these new parts. Okay, next update. Hopefully you can excuse my messy bench. We're right into deadlines now, so trying to get this one finished. One for the video that you're watching, but Telford's looming, 2018 as well, and I want this one on the table as well as a few other projects. So I'm glad to report I've managed to get all the detail back in. So we showed you the panels there, but the whole of the underside's been done. Where we were using super glue, I ran through with the riveter, and it cracked a bit of the super glue. Now I'm not going to lose sleep about the underside, especially here as well, because this kit is not designed to be going into competitions or anything like that, and no one's certainly going to be picking it up, that's for sure. So it's not too much of a problem, but even with that, for the benefit of you guys, I've tried to put as much detail in here as possible. The panel line there going up through the fuselage is nice and straight, and I've put rivets both sides and put the horizontal panel lines in, so everything's back in there, and I'm reasonably happy with this. So I've put on a few of the more important details, trying to work through the resin set that we got here. Obviously got the oil cooler, which is an important feature, so that's gone on and gives it a bit of a strange look, as you can see there, sort of sticks out a little bit. Then we've put the flap here as well, which has gone on without issue. I mean, it was a little tricky to get in there, but it was nothing, you know, when you're working with this amount of resin, you soon get used to these fiddly little things. What else? That's about it on the underside. I mean, there's no super glue around here, but this is a very funny little join that Eduard have decided to put in, the way these two bits go together, and it was nothing but trouble, but I've got through it, so I'm happy with that now. And as you can probably see, now I want to get this right, we've got flaps, slats and ailerons. We get to use the kit parts here, so that's not a problem. Oh, hang on, let's get it right. So the kit parts just slot in. Obviously there's no resin here, so they fit as much as you'd expect, and we are going to pose the slats open, which is going to be like that. So there's going to be a slight gap there. I don't know if you can see that. So the slats sort of slide forward like this and just sit proud. Now I'm going to leave these off till the end of the build, so I can paint this ROM 02, and then this is obviously going to be the ROM 63, so there'll be a slight contrast there, and if I stick this like that, it's going to be difficult to get into that little groove. So if I leave it off, that's fine. I can paint this the exterior colour, and then when it's all done, glue it on, and then weather as appropriate. Kit parts go on for the flaps and the slats, like I've discussed, so I've put the flaps on. Then we've got the ailerons. Now this is the part for tonight. This is this evening's project, is to get these on. Now they do come with tabs, much like the kit parts. Let me just grab those. Now I think I said at the start of the video about these ailerons and not really seeing the difference. Now I don't know if I actually mentioned and saw the difference, but I have since realised. The difference is obviously this part. So the kit part ailerons, let's bring you in a little bit, have this section here for the rear of the air intakes or oil coolers. I'm going to call them air intakes, but it's the two scoops that the E have here. So you have two big great big air scoops underneath there, and the back of those goes onto the aileron. And obviously the D did not have that, so we are going to need to use these ailerons, and they do look thinner and quite nice as well. Oh, sorry, and we've also got these pegs here. Now those pegs give you the correct drop. So they give you that, oh, I've zoomed in a bit much. So they give you the correct drop. So you put them in and there you go. Well, it's slipped a little bit, but you know, if you glue it, you get the correct drop. Now, these also come with it. And in my haste in trying to fit it, I've snapped them off because they didn't quite fit. And the reason for that is, I don't know how well I'll be able to show you this, but as with some things in resin, can you see that gap there? They are not straight, they are a little bit warped. There, that probably shows it quite well. So hopefully you can see I'm pressing that now and they just sort of lift up. You can see the blue coming through there on the end. And so I'm going to need to straighten those out with a bit of hot water, which I'm going to do in a minute on camera. And then that should mean that they're fitting quite nicely. I mean, you could probably, it's quite subtle, you could probably glue that and then push it in. It does move, but I'm going to try and straighten them. And then I can select the right drop using the kit part as a guide. And once I've got one in, then I can line up the one on the far side. You may also notice this here. There is a gap in the join here, and you do just need to fill that. Now, it's easier to do that before you glue the wings together, because you can just push a piece of plasticard in there. But what I've actually done is glued a great big piece triangle in there on the outside, and then sanded it flush, and it's so smooth now that by the time you've got the aileron in there, you won't notice a difference. You see, you cover up the gap. So that just, otherwise, where you can see that white plastic, there would be a hole, so you don't want that. So that's, like I said, the next project, I'm looking to just finish this one off now so I can move on to some other projects that I need to get done. So I've put the exhaust stubs in, did that this morning, that was no problem. You just literally cut them off the block using a razor saw. So you've got two there, you've got a couple spares, and then you do need to clean out the holes here. Just go around with a blade, and they just slot in, and I've used PVA glue, which I watered down so it just run in there quite nicely. So I still had plenty of time to play with it and make sure it was lined up, but it does fit pretty well. And I've also put the a piece of 5mm rod in here, 0.5mm rod there, a plastic rod. I just drilled a hole here, pushed it in. There is a hole there, a depression to make that easier. And that just gives you the, I don't know what that is, but it's meant to be there. So I've put that piece in as well, and that's all in the instructions. Still following through with the alley cat instructions. And there's not been any problem with that. Then we've got onto the propeller here. Now that's been okay. I have strengthened that. I've put a piece of metal rod in there. Now these are flattened off on the bottoms, so you can line them up quite nicely. And then what I've done is lined it up and held it there with my thumb before gluing, and then drilled through from this side and put a piece of metal rod through there into this bit, glued that, and then pushed this one onto it. And that just makes it a bit stronger instead of relying on a flat glue point. Then we've got the cone which goes on. And I mean, things fit okay. I'd say they're just good enough. It really could do with being spread out a little bit. I don't really know what's going on here. I think there's been a slight miscast or something on this back plate, because not only does the nose cone not fit correctly, however, with that said, I think if I tease it out, I can sort of get it glued out a bit. I think you see what I'm trying to get at. I mean, if I can push it a little bit, I might be able to bend it out just a little bit. But more importantly, when you get it on here, I'll take the nose cone off for that, you get it on the end of the nose, you'll see that the back plate doesn't really fit. But you can make it fit. And for this purpose, this is what I'm going to do. Now you'll see it's not obviously square, or, you know, it's not a perfect circle. Now if you turn it like that, I mean, it would be crap if you had to have it like that and have the propeller sideways, wouldn't it? But you can make it, where was it? I think you just have them at an angle like that, and it's flush around the top, as you can see there, so it fits nicely, but obviously the gap is on the underneath here. And once you've got the nose cone on, you know, you're going to struggle to get down there. So I'm going to concentrate on making sure this is squared off and flush here. And then that's what I'm going to work to. This update here is mainly just to point out what I was saying with the propeller. So I've got the nose cone on here and everything, and it's on the back plate. And the propeller blades are in there. I've used a little bit of... just use this pencil. A little bit of super glue just on the ends. I did use some hot water treatment. I said I was going to show it, but I mean, there wasn't a lot to show. It was just dipping in water, and it was a little bit complicated to show on camera, so I chose not to. And I managed to bend it out quite nicely, but you had to watch for these openings, because if you bend it too far, they're obviously then off, so they were your sort of limit. So I got them as far as I could, so that they're flush. This is the idea, that they're sitting flush with the back plate. And then I just built it up with super glue on the edges, and obviously glued it with super glue and then just filled it in. And I'm looking at the profile now, and it's, you know, there's not like a strange bump or anything. It's quite smooth and tapered. So that's gone okay. The only thing that's slightly worrying me is whether there needs to be a panel line there or not. And it's very difficult to scribe into super glue, so we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So that's the first thing. And secondly, getting it to line up on the nose here. What I've actually done is taken off the pin here. There was a pin there that you slot this onto. I can't tell if it's the hole on the back plate here or the pin. I think it's the hole on the back plate. But one of them wasn't centrally aligned, so after cutting that off you can get the fit much nicer. So you can get sort of 2/3 of the fit around the nose there, looking okay, and then at the bottom, you know, you can just live with that. It's going to look a little. It's going to be a bit of an overhang from the back, the cowling showing through, but it's very subtle. I don't know if I can really show you this on camera, but you'll see it later in the build. So we're just trying any excess part of the cowling showing we'll have on the bottom, so it's out of the way. So that's done. So that's the propeller. I've put the machine guns in just here, and they were nothing more than cutting them off the resin block and gluing them straight in. So we've got one that's slightly set back further, so you just make sure that's on the right hand side. So here. And I got the rest of the exhaust stubs in. So now we're pretty much running on with plastic parts now. I can't see that there's any more resin parts to add, to be honest. So as far as I know, now we just run on and get all of the plastic parts sorted. So that's how everything's coming together. The only real big job I've got is masking the canopy. Something just to point out that isn't mentioned in the instructions. Now, I don't know how I'm going to show you this. I'm going to try my best to make this work. So can you see here, this is the piece of the canopy, the rear canopy. As you can see, it's quite scuffed. That's because here there is a hole and a base plate for the antenna mast, which these Spanish 109Ds did not have. So this should just be a straight bar running across the top into the rear bar, and obviously there was like a rounded bit with a hole. So I've had to fill the hole, and more slightly difficulty, and a slightly more difficult job was to get rid of the raised round area here. So what I've done is just tried to cut a new line in there to continue this bar running across, and then just kind of lifted it out there with the point of a knife just to try and get a sharp edge there, then sanded into that corner to try and blend it back, and then this is just a bit of perfect plastic putty there. So once that's dried, sand that level and then bring it all level, and then try and buff it back with a very with one of the buffing sanding sticks I've got. I think I've got a 4000 grit one, and that should come back as clear as the rest of it. So just something to note, that that is something that would show up a little bit so need to take care of that. Okay, so we are now running through the stages of this. So we've got some paint on the aircraft. This is not the finished colour by any means. What I've done here is I'm starting on a bit of pre-shading. I'm not going to go too over the top. I just want to pick two different colours that are going to are going to help with the coverage that's going over them. So we've got just a basic scheme of ROM 65 and 63. So what you've got there is pretty much what you can see at the top of the bottle there. So you've got a kind of beigey type green up there, a bit of a strange colour, and then you've got the light blue. So if I start doing black lines on all the panel lines underneath here, it's going to take quite a lot of coverage because I don't want it to be too over the top to get this light colour over. So what I've gone for is XF53, which is Tamiya neutral grey. And what I can do with that is two things. I can check that everything's how I want it as far as the airframe's concerned, and it does look, you know, more or less tidy. And where I've sanded back through a few bits, that's filled in the gaps there, and now when I go over the MRP you shouldn't see that so much. And also it will give a darker colour where I can lay a bit more of the MRP paint on in certain places and not so much in others, to give a kind of mottling effect, which you will see on the top, if you can see that on the wings. Now this is the effect I'm hoping to achieve when we put the next colour on. So this is olive green from Tamiya, and that's just going to give me a nice base for the ROM 63, which is that sort of off funny green colour that's going to be on the top. And again, the same thing is I'll use what I've done here and try and do the same with the MRP, so it will give that effect, but not quite as heavy as this. This is obviously, you can see it's quite mottled. You want the effect to be lessened. So that should be okay, and in this situation we've been able to check just a few final issues, and there's a couple gaps appeared around the canopy section, so I've just filled that in again with a bit of the putty, with the water-based putty, and sanded back here. This is a fingerprint I got into the base paint before I put this green on, so that was showing through. Now if you're going to do this when you're sanding through paint, you need to make sure you sanded through all the layers and blended back, otherwise that will stick out like a sore thumb, which I have. I have used these paint buffers to bring it back, so I've actually sort of blended through and gone back further into the paint, so it shouldn't notice. So yeah, overall I'm quite happy with that. I was going to give the flaps and the ailerons different colours, but I'm not going to worry about that. I can probably do the same effect using the MRP. So that's the aircraft, and then we've got all the other bits done for it now. So this is the landing gear legs here, so I've painted those with Mr. Metallizer aluminium, which is a buffable paint, so I'll probably buff those up a little bit, just giving them a shine. And these are the hydraulic parts of the undercarriage that I've painted there, so they're all done now. For these tyres I've sprayed with rubber black from Tamiya, and then the inserts I've painted just with straight black from MRP. And because of the way it's built up, these inserts you can paint separately and then put them in, so you get a nice crisp edge there, so that's been absolutely brilliant. And then I've done the same thing here, so you've got the internal side of the undercarriage doors, the ROM 02 colour, and then I sprayed them the same natural grey underneath, so they tie in with what I'm going to be doing on the aircraft. The propeller, I've just sprayed that with the green again. This is going to be the base colour, and there you can see that there's no blend on the back plate there of the propeller. Now like I said, I do need to just check whether there needs to be a panel line there, but I'm probably going to leave it off anyway, because it's going to be too much hassle with it being super glue. It's going to crack. And I've given the actual blades there a coat of MRP black in preparation for an aluminium colour, which they're going to receive. And I must check, because some of the aircraft in Spain, they painted the rear of the blades black to stop any glare coming through, so I'll just check whether they did that on the 109s. I know they did it on the Stuka and a few other things, and if that's the case I'll obviously leave that black, and I've just painted the back plate black so that you don't get anything showing through and black, you know, it's going to hide quite well. So that's that, and we've painted the slats again with the same idea. So you've got the ROM02 underneath. I don't know how much of that you'll see, but I thought it was a good idea to do. And then on the top we'll come over with the 63 in the same fashion as the airframe. And then I've painted the rudder black. Now I'm going to use the decals in this kit. I wouldn't generally at this scale, but I think it completes. We're sort of doing a little review of this, I guess, in a laid back way, so we'll have a look at how the decals go on as well. But I'm going to mask the crosses on this, because that's just going to be a bit of hassle with any decal, regardless of how good they are. I wouldn't really want to do that. So that's just going to be 2 thin bits of tape making up the cross, both sides, and you can line up the cross quite easily by wherever you get it on one side, then you can pull the tape down using that as a guide, and that will match it up. And as long as it's straight, you're okay. And then we're going to cover that in white, and we will get a bit of pre-shading coming through from the black, so that'll act as pre-shading. So I use that to my benefit when I spray it over with white, and just come up with light layers and try and get a nice effect in the recesses there. So that's all the parts. This is how I like to do my painting now, in broken down into stages. So yeah, this makes it a little bit easier for me. So I think what I'm going to do first is the underside colour. Then we're going to do, and obviously the associated bits, then I'm going to paint the colour on the top side, then do the white on the rudder, and also do the white wingtips, because it has white wingtips, coming back to about here, I believe. And then we're pretty much done with the painting then, so then I would actually bring everything together. So I'm going to, I'll do that sped up on camera, bringing the stuff together. I am going to show you a bit of painting as well in a second. So then we'll bring the undercarriage together. I'll probably get all of that on so that the aircraft's complete, and then get ready for decaling. I'm not going to put a gloss coat on, we're going to go straight on to the MRP. They're shiny enough, and I'm also trying, you know, I don't need to have a gloss coat under decals so much, so I'm not going to worry about that, and try and use the natural layers and try and work with the MRP and do all the weathering over the top. However, I'll probably seal in the decals. So we'll probably do all of that now on sped up camera, and then recap once the decals are on and we start getting into the weathering.